President Obama striking a climate deal with China.
Reducing carbon pollution.
A new relationship with China.
Embrace the energy revolution.
Big question mark.
I was particularly distressed by the deal apparently he's reached with the Chinese.
The air we breathe in the United States is the same air they breathe in China.
Because there's such smog and smoke and pollution in the air.
To embrace the energy revolution.
The pipeline's impact on our climate will be absolutely critical.
It is still about oil.
To lead the global effort against climate change.
We start tonight with huge news on climate change. The United States and China have reached a historic agreement to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Under the deal, the United States will curb its greenhouse gas emissions by 26 to 28% from 2005 levels by the year 2025. China plans to peak its carbon emissions by the year 2030. China will also aim to get 20% of their energy from zero carbon emission sources by the same year. This agreement marks the first time China has agreed to peak its carbon emissions. President Obama addressed the history-making deal on Tuesday in China.
Today, I am proud that we can announce a historic agreement. I commend President Xi, his team, and the Chinese government for the commitment they are making to slow, peak, and then reverse the course of China's carbon emissions. This is a major milestone in the U.S.-China relationship, and it shows what's possible when we work together on an urgent global challenge. In addition, by making this announcement today together, we hope to encourage all major economies to be ambitious.
I was particularly distressed by the deal apparently he's reached with the Chinese on his current trip, which, as I read the agreement, requires the Chinese to do nothing at all for 16 years, while these carbon emission regulations are creating havoc in my state and other states around the country. I would welcome the president moving to the middle. I've said before, I hope we can do some business on trade and maybe tax reform. First indications have not been very helpful.
McConnell and Republicans aren't happy because their main argument against acting on climate change is now pretty much toast. For years, Republicans have been saying we can't take action until China does. The Huffington Post put together this great clip of their favorite talking points.
We can't do it alone as one nation.
The problem's in China, the problem's in Mexico, the problem's in India.
If we got India, China, and other industrialized countries not working with us, all we're going to do is ship millions of American jobs overseas.
China made the comment that they will not be engaging in a cap-and-trade system.
There are other countries that are polluting in the atmosphere much greater than we are at this point. China, India, they're not going to stop doing what they're doing.
This motion, what it does, it would prevent Congress from passing any law with new mandates on greenhouse gas emissions unless both China and India had the same mandates.
America's a country, it's not a planet.
If countries like China and India and Russia aren't part of a carbon reduction global program, that it does not matter what we do.
So those arguments no longer hold water.
Keep in mind, this is a country with such bad pollution that an estimated 670,000 people died from it in the year 2012. It is a country that had to close thousands of factories, shut down gas stations, and tell citizens to stop driving just to get blue skies for President Obama's visit. Under today's agreement, the U.S. has agreed to emit 26 to 28% less carbon in 2025 than it did in 2005, double the previous pace of reduction. And China has agreed to peak its carbon emissions by the year 2030. In order to do this, renewable energy will need to account for 20% of China's total energy production by that year. As the #1 and #2 carbon emitters in the world, the U.S. and China account for a staggering 40% of the world's emissions. But for all the talk of historic agreement, Republicans in Congress were unimpressed. House Majority Leader John Boehner called it the latest example of the president's crusade against affordable, reliable energy. Climate change denier and likely incoming chairman of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, James Inhofe, called the deal a non-binding charade. This sounds sort of like the president's position on immigration. If these guys aren't going to do anything, the administration is going to go over their head. Is that right?
Well, the numbers we've talked about in reaching this joint announcement are numbers that we can achieve with the President's leadership on our climate action plan, with the rules that are underway at EPA, with voluntary actions, knowing that the business community is ready to take action, knowing that our states are. We are going to move forward to deliver these reductions and do what the American people want, which is to protect public health, to deliver for them the kind of protections they need for their kids to have a secure future.
Kind of cutting edge of climate denialism, which is sort of climate helplessness, which is basically, well, we can't do anything. They've sort of stopped denying the science so much. It's basically, we can't do anything because China and India, China and India.
Right.
And this takes away
because China
pulls the Jenga block out from under that argument, right? And the idea is that despite the fact that these are the same people that think American leadership is important and everything else, that it's foolish to go do anything because China's just going to admit anyway. And one of the things you got to understand here is the way that the Chinese government works is the Chinese government saying they will do something is basically the Chinese government doing that thing.
Right.
I mean, and for
unlike
better
our
or for worse.
government.
Yeah, which I don't want to say that's a superior model because I don't think it is, actually.
Right.
But you have to understand that, like, when they announce GDP targets, when they announce emission reduction targets, like, they hit those targets generally.
Right.
And so that's a big deal for them to say, they've never done this before, to actually pin themselves down and commit to something.
Dr. Sanjan, what do you make of Chris is obviously very bullish on the Chinese meeting these targets. How meaningful is 2030? Should that number actually be 2025? There seems to be discrepancies in the scientific community about what is the real push number.
Look, I talked to several of my colleagues today and last night, scientists who are working in this field, very credible people. And without a doubt, every single one of them was hugely optimistic. I mean, the thing that I heard from folks were, for the first time in our lives, in our generation, we really feel optimistic that this is something we're taking seriously and we can get a handle on. So just there's a big deal. Now, where the target should be does make a big difference because, look, China is saying we're going to hit peak around 2030. But we're going to try and do it sooner. And if they do it even 1 or 2 years sooner, it will make a vast difference on the long-term trajectory of how much carbon we put in the atmosphere because it's such a big deal.
Right.